After leaving the mountains behind, the city should have felt like a relief, but it didn't. The noise of the streets, the flashing lights, the crowds, none of it could drown out the memories of the forest. I couldn't sleep at night. Every creak of the building sounded like a knock on my door. Every passing car seemed like a shadow waiting for me to glance away. The first night back, I tossed and turned in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I could hear my own heartbeat, louder than the cars outside, louder than the hum of the city. My fingers clutched the sheets, pulling them tight as if that would somehow protect me. But I knew it followed. I tried to shake the thought, told myself I was being paranoid. I was safe now. The Silent One couldn't reach me here, or could it? For the next few nights, it was the same dream. Always the same. I was back in the cabin, the woods surrounding me. There were shadows moving outside my window just out of sight. The breathing, the slow, heavy sound would begin, and I would feel the same terror rise in my chest. But every time I tried to leave, to scream, I couldn't. My feet felt stuck in the floor, my mouth frozen. I woke up gasping every time, drenched in sweat, but each time the feeling stayed longer, the fear creeping into my waking life. I was afraid to close my eyes, afraid to sleep at all. One afternoon, I decided I needed closure. The cabin had been abandoned for months, and I thought maybe, just maybe, going back would finally make me feel normal again. I told myself I could handle it. But as soon as I pulled up to the cabin, I knew I made a mistake. It wasn't just the cabin itself that was wrong. It was the woods. They looked different. The trees were darker, the snow deeper, and the sky, gray and heavy, seemed to weigh down on everything. I stood there for a moment, my feet frozen to the spot, as if someone was watching me. The air felt thick, like it had been waiting for me. But there was something else. A smell. The familiar scent of pine and earth had been replaced by something fouler. A damp, rotten odor that made me gag. Something, or someone, had been here recently. I stepped inside, the door creaking as it opened. Dust and mold greeted me, but the chair, the same chair from before, was moved. It was exactly like that night. The chair by the window moved just enough to indicate someone had been sitting there. I froze. I wasn't alone. The door slammed shut behind me. I whipped around, but nothing was there. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I wasn't alone. I stumbled backward, my hand falling on something cold. A knife, a sharp, cold blade buried in the countertop, like it had been waiting for me. I yanked it out, but the weight of it seemed wrong in my hand. I was about to turn and run when I heard the sound again. A knock, software barely audible, then another. It was coming from the back door, the one I never used. It was the last place I wanted to go. I knew that door led to the woods, to the place where things had gone terribly wrong. But something compelled me to move. The knock came again, and this time it sounded louder. Knock, knock, knock. And then, the whisper. A voice so faint it was barely a breath. I see you, I had no choice. My body moved of its own accord, drawn toward the door. The snow outside was deep, but as I stepped out, my eyes widened in shock. There, in the freshly fallen snow, were the footprints. They weren't like the others. These were bigger, deeper, and they were coming from behind the cabin. I didn't want to follow them, but I had no choice. I had to know what was out there. I couldn't run from this anymore. I walked through the woods, feeling the weight of every step, the snow crunching beneath my feet. Every shadow seemed to move. The trees whispered in the wind, branches swaying like they were reaching for me. The air was colder than I remembered, the silence louder. I walked deeper, the footprints growing fainter with each step. I turned around to go back, but then I heard it again. The whisper. This time it was right behind me. "I'm always here." That's when I saw it. A figure. Tall, thin, unnaturally tall. It stood just past the edge of my vision, waiting for me to notice. And when I did, it froze, like it had been waiting for me to finally look. I felt my chest tighten, a breath caught in my throat. But it wasn't just the figure that made my skin crawl. It was the eyes, dark, hollow, empty eyes that stared right through me. And then it smiled. A slow, stretching smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Its mouth was too wide, too unnatural, a grin that shouldn't have been possible. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My body was frozen in place, my legs unwilling to move. My mind screamed, but my mouth wouldn't work. The figure started moving closer. I couldn't look away. Its presence was like gravity, pulling me toward it until the last thing I saw was the outstretched hand reaching toward me. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. It took me a moment to realize where I was. My cabin was gone. The woods were gone. It was the city again. But the fear in my chest hadn't faded. The whispering hadn't stopped. In the silence of my apartment, I could still hear it. It was still waiting for me. I know I can't outrun it. It will always find me. The Silent One is a presence, a force that has followed me. It knows me now. And when you make the mistake of meeting it, of letting it in, it never leaves. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if I'll survive this. But I'm done running. If it comes for me, I'll be ready. I know I can't outrun it. It will always find me. The Silent One is a presence, a force that has followed me. It knows me now. And when you make the mistake of meeting it, of letting it in, it never leaves. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if I'll survive this. But I'm done running. If it comes for me, I'll be ready. And now, when I hear a knock at my door, when I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up in the dark, I know the Silent One is here, and I can't escape. Not anymore. As I walked deeper into the forest, I felt an eerie sense of being watched, as though every tree, every shadow was alive and waiting for something. My footsteps, muffled by the thick layer of snow beneath me, seemed to echo in the silence. Theo and I walked side by side, our breath fogging in the freezing air, the sound of our boots crunching on the snow the only noise in the vastness around us. The further we ventured, the more disorienting the forest became. The path, once clear and defined, seemed to twist and bend in unnatural ways. My mind raced with thoughts of those strange figures. Were they human? What were they doing in these woods? My thoughts turned dark. What if they were stalking me? What if they were following us? I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a shadow flitting between the trees, but there was nothing. We reached a clearing after what felt like hours. The snow was undisturbed here, the forest quiet as ever. It was almost as if the world had held its breath. I looked to Theo and he nodded, signaling for me to stay close. His hand was firmly gripping his rifle, his eyes scanning every inch of the clearing. "Something's off," he whispered. I didn't need to ask him to elaborate. I felt it too. Something was out there, waiting. We slowly made our way across the clearing, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. I didn't dare break the silence. Every crunch of snow beneath our feet seemed too loud, too conspicuous. The atmosphere felt thick, as though the air itself was suffocating. We were getting closer to the place where we last saw the strange footprints. Each step was like walking into a deeper void. And then I heard it, a rustling from somewhere deeper in the trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart raced. Was it an animal or something else? Theo froze beside me, his eyes narrowed. He motioned for me to crouch down. My stomach churned with dread, but I obeyed without a word. We huddled behind a cluster of thick trees, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't tell how much time passed before I finally saw them. They emerged from the shadows like ghosts, their movements unnatural and jerky. At first they were just silhouettes, but then they stepped into the moonlight. My blood turned cold. There were at least 5 of them, humanoid figures, but not quite. They were taller than average, their limbs unnaturally long, twisted, and their bodies hunched over. The 2 smaller ones were moving erratically, twitching in place, their heads darting around like frightened animals. They were barefoot, just like the ones I had seen before, walking in the snow without so much as a flinch from the cold. Their skin, as far as I could tell, was pale, almost as if they hadn't seen sunlight in years, if ever. They were looking for something, or someone, and my stomach dropped when I realized it could be us. Theo and I remained absolutely still, not daring to breathe too loudly. The figures slowly moved closer, one of the smaller ones stopping near a tree, bending down to sniff the bark, its movements bizarre, animalistic. "I think they can sense us," Theo whispered, barely moving his lips. "We need to get back. Now." We didn't need to say more. The urgency in his voice spoke volumes. We began to backtrack, every step feeling like a millennia in the silence of the woods. But the deeper we went, the more I felt like we were walking into the heart of something far darker than I could have imagined. My mind flashed back to that feeling in the clearing, the wrongness of it all. What were these things? Why had they been tracking me? My home. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The trees around us felt closer now, as though they were leaning in, watching. We stopped just shy of the edge of the woods, the snow thick beneath our feet. I glanced over at Theo, his face grim. "What now?" I asked in a low voice. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on something beyond me. When he finally turned to look at me, his face was pale, drained of color. "I think we've been followed," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of snow beneath heavy footsteps. A figure emerging from the darkness. My heart froze in my chest. The same twisted silhouette towering above the trees, its head slowly tilting to one side as it locked eyes with us. The world seemed to slow down in that instant. My mind screamed at me to run, to move, to do something. But my body was paralyzed, as if it had become part of the woods itself. Theo slowly raised his rifle. "Get ready," he murmured. The figure took a step forward, then another. And just as it was about to move closer, something remarkable happened. More figures appeared from the shadows, stepping out of the darkness with unnatural precision. The group was gathering, surrounding us. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. What were these creatures? And why were they so interested in us? Suddenly, one of the smaller figures lunged at Theo, a blur of movement. Theo fired once, twice, but it was too fast, too erratic. The bullet missed, and the figure darted out of view, disappearing into the woods. I was still frozen, and then the ground beneath me shifted. One of the figures was circling around behind me. I whirled around just as it lunged. It was all happening so fast, but I managed to dodge it, stumbling backward, just out of its reach. The thing hissed, a guttural sound, and then backed off, as if assessing its next move. "We have to get out of here," I yelled. Theo grabbed my arm, pulling me with him. We ran, hearts racing, adrenaline surging. Behind us, I could hear the soft padding of footsteps. Closer now. They were following.